She knew something was wrong. The man had been behind them for too long, following too closely, moving with a purpose that didn't feel like a casual hiker on a Monday afternoon. She was 14 years old, standing on a rotting wooden railway bridge 60 feet above a creek in rural Indiana, and she did something that no investigator, no FBI agent, no law enforcement professional could have planned or anticipated. She pulled out her phone, she opened Snapchat, and she pressed record. She captured his face, his jacket, his posture, his voice giving them a direct command. That footage, captured by a 14-year-old girl in the most terrifying moments of her life, would be watched by millions of people across the world. And for 5 years, not one of those millions of people knew his name. True crime, dark stories, and the kind of cases that keep you up at night, all things I'm mildly obsessed with. And based on the fact that you're still here, so are you. And if you're new here, we drop a new case every other day. Real stories, real investigations, no fluff. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything to a small channel like this. Okay, let's get into this. To understand what happened on February 13th, 2017, you first have to understand where it happened. Delphi, Indiana sits in Carroll County in the northwestern part of the state, a small, quiet town of approximately 3,000 people. It is the kind of place where the same families have lived for generations, where the grocery store clerk knows your name, where the high school football game on a Friday night is genuinely the biggest thing happening in town. It is the kind of place where you do not lock your doors, where your children walk to their friends' houses alone, where dropping 2 teenage girls off at a hiking trail on a day off from school is not something that raises any alarm, because nothing like this has ever happened here before. Libby German was 14 years old. Everyone who knew her called her Libby, and everyone, it seemed, knew her. She was a freshman at Delphi Community High School, sharp and funny and deeply social in that specific way that certain teenagers have of making every room feel more alive when they walk into it. She liked photography. She was active on social media. She was the kind of girl who documented her life, not in a performative way, but because she genuinely found things worth capturing and wanted to share them with the people she cared about. She lived with her grandparents, Mike and Becky Patty, who had raised her and who she was extraordinarily close to. She was their Libby, their person, the center of their world in the specific, irreplaceable way that a grandchild can be. Abigail Joyce Williams was 13 years old, Abby to everyone who loved her. She was a year behind Libby at school, still in 8th grade, but the two of them had built the kind of friendship that doesn't care about grade levels. They were drawn to each other. They made each other laugh. Abby was quieter than Libby in the way that some people are deeply present without filling every silence. The kind of person whose words, when she did say something, made people pay attention. She was sweet in a way that felt completely genuine, thoughtful, easy to be around. She lived with her family in Delphi and had the kind of open, unworried future that 13 is supposed to look like. February 13th, 2017 was a Monday, President's Day. School was canceled. It was a cold, overcast winter day in Indiana, the kind of gray that settles over the Midwest in February and makes you want to get outside just to feel something other than 4 walls. Libby and Abby had plans. They were going to spend the afternoon at the Monon High Bridge Trail, a popular outdoor spot on the edge of town where the old abandoned Monon railway trestle crossed over Deer Creek. It was a place both girls knew, a place the whole town knew. Families went there on weekends. Kids went there after school. It was one of those local landmarks that exists in the specific memory of a small town as a place that belongs to everyone. Just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Libby's older sister drove them to the trailhead at the end of Bicycle Bridge Road and dropped them off. They were going to walk out to the bridge, take some photos, enjoy the afternoon, and be picked up later. Simple. Normal. The kind of plan 2 teenage girls make 100 times in 100 different small towns on a day off from school. The Monon High Bridge is not a comfortable structure to walk across. It was built in 1891 as part of the old Monon railway line, a massive wooden trestle supported by iron framework spanning approximately 500 feet across the valley above Deer Creek. At its highest point, it sits 63 feet above the water. The wooden planks that form the walking surface are old, warped, spaced unevenly, some rotting entirely. Walking across it requires full attention, eyes down, careful steps, and awareness of exactly where you are placing your feet. There is no railing, there is no safety net, and there is, critically, only one way on and one way off. Once you are on the bridge and someone appears behind you, you have nowhere to go but forward. The girls made it to the bridge. Photos were taken. Images later recovered that show them smiling, happy, exactly where they were supposed to be. At some point that afternoon, while they were on the bridge or making their way back, a man appeared behind them. He was wearing a blue jacket, a darker blue, somewhat heavy, with the collar up slightly against the cold, dark jeans, a hat pulled down. His hands were tucked into his pockets. He was walking toward them, not quickly, not running, not rushing, walking, with a slow, steady, purposeful stride that communicated something beyond an afternoon hike. He was moving toward them specifically, and there was nothing between him and them except rotting bridge planks and 60 feet of winter air above a frozen creek. Libby German understood the situation she was in. She was 14 years old, on a bridge, with no exit, with a strange man approaching from behind, and she processed it with a clarity and composure that is genuinely extraordinary to consider. She did not scream. She did not attempt to run past him. Instead, she reached into her pocket, she pulled out her phone, she opened Snapchat, and she pressed record. She held the camera toward the man as he walked across the wooden planks toward her, capturing him in the gray February light, his jacket, his posture, his face, partially visible beneath the brim of his hat, his hands in his pockets, his walk, and then his voice, low, flat, unhurried, spoken to two teenage girls who had nowhere to go. 3 words. Guys, down the hill. That audio, that image, that act of recording, those were the last things Libby German sent from the Monon High Bridge. Her phone was with her when she went down the hill. The footage was saved. And what happened after they went down that hill, into the tree line, toward the banks of Deer Creek below, has been kept largely sealed by investigators to this day, because the specific details of the crime scene contain information that only one person in the world fully knows. And that information is being preserved for a courtroom. When Libby didn't answer texts that afternoon, her family started trying to reach her. When the pickup time came and went with no response, worry became urgent. Family members drove to the trailhead, then neighbors came, then police were called, then the Carroll County Sheriff's Department, the Indiana State Police, and volunteers from across the region were moving through the woods near Deer Creek in the dark February evening. They searched through the night, through the cold, through the dark. On the morning of February 14th, 2017, Valentine's Day, searchers found them. Both Libby German and Abigail Williams near the creek below the bridge trail, dead. Libby was 14, Abby was 13. They had been dropped off at a trailhead on a Monday afternoon in a town where nothing like this had ever happened. They never came home. The impact on Delphi, Indiana was total. In a town of 3,000 people, there is no such thing as an abstract tragedy. These were children that people knew, teachers who had taught them, classmates who had sat next to them, families who had watched them grow up at church, at school events, at the local park. The grief that settled over that town in February 2017 was not the grief of a headline. It was the grief of a community that had just lost 2 of its own children in the most violent and senseless way imaginable. Vigils were organized. The high school gymnasium filled with students and parents and community members holding candles and photographs. There are no words for the specific weight of a small town trying to hold itself together after something like this. Behind the scenes, investigators were already working with something remarkable. When Libby's phone was recovered at the scene, the footage was there, all of it. The video of the man on the bridge, the audio of his voice. In the immediate days after the murders, law enforcement faced a decision that almost never arises in active homicide investigations: whether to make the evidence public. Normally, releasing crime scene footage is not something investigators do. It can compromise the investigation, contaminate witness accounts, tip off the suspect. But this case had produced almost nothing in terms of conventional physical evidence. No weapon recovered, no fingerprints, no DNA match in any database. And they had a video. On February 22, 2017, 9 days after the murders, Indiana State Police held a press conference and released a portion of the footage from Libby's Snapchat. They showed the still image of the man on the bridge. They played the audio of his voice saying, "Guys, down the hill." They described him as a white male, 5'6" to 6 feet tall, medium build, likely between 18 and 40 years of age. They asked anyone who recognized the man, the jacket, the posture, the voice, anything, to come forward. And then they waited. And that's where the whole story cracks open. The footage spread everywhere within hours of its release. National news networks, social media, YouTube, Reddit, true crime forums, and Facebook groups and Twitter threads. By the end of the first week, the video had been seen by millions of people, tens of millions, eventually hundreds of millions. The still image of the man on the bridge became one of the most widely circulated pieces of unidentified suspect footage in American criminal history. Communities dedicated entirely to identifying him appeared online, forums with thousands of members poring over every pixel of the image, threads analyzing his gait, his jacket, the way he held his hands, the specific cadence of his voice saying 3 words. People submitted names, hundreds of names, then thousands. Every single tip was investigated and cleared. Every name went nowhere. Every lead dried up. In April 2019, more than 2 years after the murders, investigators released a new composite sketch of the suspect. This one looked noticeably different from the original sketch released in 2017. Different bone structure, different age range suggested, different overall appearance. The public was confused. Some wondered if investigators were now looking at a different person entirely. Law enforcement explained that the new sketch reflected updated analysis and a refined understanding of the suspect's appearance. The online communities that had been working the case for 2 years had to reconsider everything they thought they knew. More tips came in, more names were submitted, more leads were chased. And still, nothing led to an arrest. The families of Libby German and Abigail Williams lived inside this investigation in a way that is almost impossible to fully comprehend. Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother, became one of the most consistent and composed public voices for justice in the case. She gave interviews, she attended memorials, she kept Libby's name alive in the public conversation year after year after year. Mike Patty did the same. The Williams family stood alongside them. Every February 13th, the community of Delphi gathered to remember 2 girls who were taken from a hiking trail on a President's Day afternoon. And every February 13th, the man who killed them was somewhere in the world, unidentified and uncharged. The investigation that had produced the most widely seen suspect footage in modern true crime history had, publicly at least, stalled completely. Investigators maintained that the case was active, that tips were still being followed, that they had not given up. And behind the scenes, they were working something that the public didn't know about, something that had been sitting in the evidence file since February 2017, something small enough to hold between 2 fingers, a single unspent .40 caliber cartridge found at the crime scene, preserved, waiting. Let me explain what an unspent cartridge at a crime scene means forensically, because this is the piece of evidence that broke the entire case. When a semi-automatic pistol is fired or manually cycled, when the slide is pulled back and released, the mechanical action of the gun leaves microscopic marks on any cartridge that passes through it. The extractor claw that grabs the cartridge, the chamber walls it sits in, the breech face it rests against. Every one of these surfaces leaves specific, individual, reproducible marks on the brass casing of the cartridge. These marks are as unique to a specific firearm as a fingerprint is to a specific person. No 2 guns, even identical models from the same manufacturer, leave exactly the same marks. In 2022, investigators submitted the unspent .40 caliber cartridge found at the crime scene for advanced forensic analysis. The markings on that cartridge were matched to a specific type of firearm, a Sig Sauer pistol chambered in .40 caliber. And then, through a process of examining records, cross-referencing ownership, and following the evidence, those markings were matched to a specific individual gun, owned by a specific individual person. A pharmacist in Delphi, Indiana, named Richard Matthew Allen. I need to stop here because there is a detail about Richard Allen that I genuinely cannot get past, and I need you to sit with it for a moment. When investigators first canvassed the area in the days following the murders in February 2017, they interviewed everyone who had been near the Monon High Bridge Trail that day. It was standard procedure, a massive undertaking in a small community where dozens of people had been on those trails that week. Richard Allen was one of the people they spoke to. He told investigators he had been hiking on the trail that day, that he had seen 2 young girls on his walk. He was interviewed, he was noted, he was cleared and moved on from. And then, for 5 years, while the community of Delphi held memorials and the families gave tearful interviews, and the whole country stared at footage of the man on the bridge, Richard Allen went to work at his pharmacy every single day. He filled prescriptions for the people of Delphi. He waved at neighbors. He lived 15 minutes from that bridge. Drop your reaction in the comments right now, because I have gone through this case more times than I can count, and that fact hits me differently every single time. I will be reading every comment. On October 13th, 2022, 2 weeks before his arrest, Richard Allen was re-interviewed by investigators. The bullet casing evidence had been confirmed. They knew what it meant. They brought him back in. And according to court documents later filed by the prosecution, Allen made statements during that interview that went significantly beyond his original account of simply being on the trail and seeing two girls. The precise content of those statements has been partially sealed as part of the ongoing legal proceedings, but investigators characterize them as highly incriminating. Statements that, combined with the physical evidence, formed the core of the case against him. On October 26, 2022, 5 years, 8 months, and 13 days after Libby German and Abigail Williams were murdered, Richard Matthew Allen was arrested at his home in Delphi, Indiana. He was 51 years old. He was charged with 2 counts of murder. The arrest happened quietly. There was no dramatic moment, no chase, no standoff. Police came to his door and he was taken. The man who had lived in the same town as the families of his victims, who had shared the same streets, the same stores, the same community, was in handcuffs before the day was over. The news broke over Delphi with the force of 5 years of compressed waiting. People who had shared the Composite sketches, who had watched the bridge video until they knew every frame, who had attended every memorial, suddenly had a name. And the name was not a stranger from somewhere else. It was their pharmacist, the man at the CVS on the main street, the man who had lived among them the whole time. Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother, made a statement. She said she had waited for this day, that she had always believed it would come. She did not celebrate. She simply acknowledged that the long wait had ended and that the next chapter was beginning. The legal proceedings that followed Richard Allen's arrest have been, by any measure, extraordinarily complicated. Allen was held at the Carroll County Jail initially, then transferred to the Wabash Valley Correctional Facility in Carlisle, Indiana, a maximum security prison located hours from Delphi, as the pre-trial period extended. Multiple people who visited him during this period, including his legal team, reported that his mental and physical condition deteriorated significantly during his incarceration. His original defense attorneys eventually withdrew from the case. A new legal team was appointed. That team filed a series of aggressive motions, alleging that the state had withheld critical evidence from the defense, and that their client had been subjected to conditions that compromised his well-being and his ability to assist in his own defense. The defense team also advanced a theory about the crime that went in a strikingly different direction from the prosecution's case. They argued that elements of the crime scene suggested a ritualistic killing connected to a broader group, pointing to aspects of how the victims were found, and invoking references to Norse paganism and Odinism. Prosecutors pushed back firmly and consistently on this characterization, calling it unsupported and a deliberate attempt to distract a jury from the physical evidence tying Richard Allen to the murders. A special judge was eventually appointed to handle the case after issues arose with the original judge. Multiple sealed hearings were held. The pre-trial process became one of the most legally contested in Indiana's recent history. Richard Allen has pleaded not guilty to both counts of murder. His legal team has consistently challenged the sufficiency and interpretation of the evidence against him. The prosecution maintains that the forensic match of the .40 caliber cartridge to Allen's specific Sig Sauer pistol, combined with his own prior admission of being on the trail that day, and the incriminating statements made in his October 2022 interview, constitutes a powerful evidentiary case. A jury will ultimately be required to weigh all of it and reach a verdict beyond reasonable doubt. The trial, as of 2025, is proceeding. The date and the full scope of what will be presented in open court remain in several respects still developing. The families have been present at every hearing. They have sat in courtrooms and listened to legal arguments about the deaths of 2 girls they raised and loved. They have not stopped. They have not stepped back. Because they cannot. Because this is all they have left to give Libby and Abby, their presence, their persistence, their refusal to let the world forget who these girls were. There is one thing about this case that exists completely separately from the legal proceedings, separately from the evidence, the arrest, the trial, the outcome, and it is the act itself. What Libby German did on that bridge. She was 14 years old. She was on a rotting wooden trestle 63 feet above a frozen creek with no exit and a strange man behind her. She was afraid. She had to have been afraid. And she thought clearly enough and bravely enough and practically enough to reach into her pocket and press record. To understand that if she could capture him, his face, his jacket, his voice, that information could matter, that it could outlast whatever was about to happen, that even if she couldn't stop what was coming, she could leave something behind. She was 14 years old, and she was right. The footage she captured sat in front of millions of people for 5 years. Millions of views, thousands of tips, entire online communities built around identifying the man in the blue jacket. And through all of it, the man in that video went to work in the town of Delphi. He drove past the trailhead on his way to the pharmacy. He lived 15 minutes from the bridge. He filled prescriptions for the neighbors of the girls he was accused of killing. For 5 years. Libby German was 14 years old. Abigail Williams was 13 years old. They were best friends who went to a hiking trail on a day off from school. They deserved to come home. And the footage that Libby left behind, captured in the worst moments of her life, with a courage that most adults will never be called upon to demonstrate, is the reason a man was arrested. The reason a community got an answer. The reason this case exists in a courtroom and not in a cold case file. True crime, dark stories, and the kind of cases that keep you up at night, all things I'm mildly obsessed with. And based on the fact that you're still here, so are you. If this case stayed with you, subscribe. We drop a new case every other day. New story, new investigation, same obsession. I'll see you in the next one.